Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for coming today, tonight, this morning, this afternoon. My name is Scott Edinburgh. I'm the founder of Personal MBA Coach, and we're going to be here to talk about round 3, right? So this is an open Q&A session. You might be used to other webinars I do with GMAT Club where we have a presentation and we give you a lot of content and information. This is more so just an informal chat. So please feel free to ask questions. Start asking them now. We'll kind of compile them all, and we'll address them as we go. I'll give you a brief background about myself, just so you know who I am, for those of you that haven't had the chance of chatting with me before. And then I'll tell you a little bit about my thoughts for round 3, and then we'll go into the Q&A. So I went to MIT for undergrad, studied economics and business at Sloan, was a teaching assistant for one of the MBA courses as an undergrad. I worked in consulting for a few years, doing mergers and acquisitions at Deloitte, and I went to Wharton for my MBA. Started Personal MBA Coach as a student at Wharton. 16 years later, we help folks around the world get into top business school and other graduate programs. In round 1, pretty much everyone that we've worked with has gotten in. We got $6.5 million in scholarships, and we do everything in the process from GMAT jury tutoring, executive assessment tutoring, early planning work, improving the profile, selecting the schools, essay editing, rec letter reviews, interview prep with a lot of former interviewers. So that's kind of a quick overview. The idea today is to answer all your questions about round 3. But of course, if you're interested in learning more about what we do, please feel free to visit personalmbacoach.com, and we're more than happy to help out. So round 3, I was actually chatting with some admissions directors recently at MBA tours. We do these tours where we travel and give talks, and talked with some directors over drinks recently about round 3 and really what they're seeing. And so what's interesting is it's not a level playing field. So depending on where you're coming from, it might be the case that some schools just need more people in round 3. And you could be in a country where they actually don't have as many students as they want. And so you might think, okay, round 3 is harder. What do I do? What are the odds of me getting in? Well, the odds might be a lot higher for you than you may think. But what we see is we're seeing a lot more randomness, right? So in these conversations, I also hear, well, we have enough from X group or from Y group. So it might be a bit complicated to think, what are my chances in round 3 based on where I am? And so what we usually recommend people to do is to apply to a wide range of schools, right? If the average applicant is applying to 6 or 7 schools in a round, maybe round 3 is at that higher number, maybe 7 or more. At the same time, round 3 deadlines are coming up soon, right? So it's March 7th overall here, in Boston anyway. And so the deadlines are coming up. We're starting someone on round 3 today, tomorrow. So it's definitely not too late to start to think about round 3. But at the same time, think about why are you the right choice for round 3 and what's the spread of schools for you. So again, please feel free to ask any questions that you have in the Q&A question fields, and we're happy to answer them. One question here that we often get is, what are the odds of round 3 now versus round 1 next year, right? So I'll just start off with that question, and maybe that'll prompt some other questions from you all. Well, we're entering into a recession here. And what we're predicting is that round 1 is going to be a little bit more competitive than previous round 1 in the last year, and then even the year before. So what does that mean for you? Will round 3 be easier or harder? Again, it does depend on the school, but there are certain instances where round 3 might actually be easier. That said, if you're looking at a school like, let's say, Columbia, you haven't started your application, you're just considering whether you should apply to Columbia Business School, they're rolling. And we often get the first or second person into Columbia in early June. We're trying to submit the applications. It's now March. So if you'll submit your application in April, when they've been looking at applications since June, the odds might not be so great. And perhaps round 1 is going to be better than round 3. So again, it gets a little bit nuanced based on the school and what they're looking for. But that's what I would think about. And I got a question here. What is the probability of getting a conversion call in round 3, right? So that's kind of what we're talking about. It's hard to give an exact probability of conversion, to be honest. I think this year is a better year than most when you think about round 3, based on the factors that I mentioned, that certain schools need people from certain backgrounds. Take China, for instance, right? And I know we have a larger contingency from India here than from China, but numbers are down in China. Lockdowns and COVID protocols and things like that, test centers not being available. And so, let's say they need more folks. In India, it's not the most competitive year ever, to be honest. It's never an easy year to apply from India, but a lot of good startup options. We invest in a lot of Indian startups, and many folks are getting good offers and compensation packages. And so let's say it's not the most competitive year ever. I would say conversion rates are going to be lower in round 3 than other rounds, though, right? And this is why you want to add more schools. How much lower? It really depends on the program, but definitely a little bit lower. So we often get a question of, I have my stats now. Do I apply now with these stats, or do I try to raise the stats and go for round 1? What's better, right? Applying, if I'm, let's say, an Indian male engineer and I have a 730 GMAT and I'm looking for an M7 school, should I apply in round 3? The answer would probably be no, because we're not sort of overcoming the handicap, let's say, that you need to overcome to get in. Now, let's say if I am in California or I'm in New York and I'm working in consulting and I already have 5-6 years of experience, should I apply now versus waiting? Well, then you have to think about your age, right? So if you're going to be 1 year older, do you want to be 1 year older applying to schools, or are you better off, applying now while there still might be some seats? So, again, this is going to vary a lot based on the applicant and the situation. The other thing you have to think about is, what are the extracurriculars that you're doing now, right? So maybe you don't have a lot of stuff in your background. We do a lot of early MBA planning packages at Personal MBA Coach, where we help people to improve their profiles between now and when they apply to school. So if your extracurriculars are light or maybe not existing, then that could be another reason why you might want to consider applying in round 1 when you have time to beef those up versus round 3. We can't do early planning work for round 3. There's no time to change yourself, but certainly by round 1 or round 2, you could do things like start a new nonprofit or get on the board of an existing one, or really do things to beef up your profile between now and then. Here's a question: what is the best way to stand out in round 3? Well, first of all, think about explaining why you're applying in round 3. Now, is it required to explain why you're applying in round 3? I would say no, right? This is not an absolute rule. It's not a requirement. But if you have a good reason, that might help. Also, think about some extra leadership that you're doing at work. And perhaps one of the reasons why you applied in round 3 is because you were starting up this new incubator at the office and you just got it off the ground and it's going to be acquired by another group within your company. I'm making this up. And perhaps that's something that you want to talk about, and that's a reason why you're going to stand out in applying round 3. The other thing you can think about is just an extra focus on engagement with the school, right? So schools are looking to fill seats that they haven't filled already, which means that if a school needs more people in round 3, probably their yield wasn't as high in round 1 and 2. Not always the case, but probably. They have extra seats, they need to fill them. And so they might be more likely to take somebody who is really interested in the school, right, and is demonstrating a lot of interest in that program. So, that's another way that you could perhaps stand out when applying in round 3. As far as questions on the US versus European schools, right, so that's a good one. Where is best to apply in round 3? Well, traditionally, US schools tend to not have as large of a percentage of the class that come from the 3rd round. That's not to discourage you from applying in round 3 to US schools, because they're definitely still taking people. And some schools have even round 4, right? So Duke and some others are adding a round 4 where they realize that they still need candidates. And so, let's add some more deadlines to try to get more of these candidates. But in Europe, that spread is much more evenly distributed. It's not totally evenly distributed, but there are a larger percentage of applicants that are applying in March and April to the European schools than to US schools. And so that's something to think about. I was talking with an applicant recently about round 3 versus round 1, and we're doing a lot of work in Europe. And so it's going to just make more sense, because if you look at LBS and Oxford and Cambridge, they just take more people in the later rounds than like an MIT or a Columbia might. So here's a question: how big of a component is the GMAT for round 3? It's a good question. I wouldn't say that there's an actual percentage of the component that varies by round. The GMAT is what it is, but what happens here is, because they want to fill certain slots and they want you to be really strong, it's going to be a bit more important. So if you're getting there early and you're in round 1 and you're one of the first people that they've taken, and they see you and they think, okay, you're really strong. You work in education policy and you work for the government and you've done a lot of great things, but you only have a 720 GMAT. Well, that's okay, because we really want someone like you and we're looking to fill the spot. But in round 3, that might be a bit harder, right? Maybe they've already taken folks that fill certain spots and they want to take you. If you're going to really raise their GMAT average, then they might be more likely to take you in the 3rd round. That's not an end all be all though. There are certain instances where people with lower stats get in, again, because the schools just need somebody like you. So here's a question. I scored 770 in GMAT, but I currently have a 3.2 GPA in my undergrad. Can I be accepted through Wharton's Deferred MBA program? So that's a great question, right? So Moelis is an absolute great school. And let's actually talk about deferred, right? So I'll answer this question and then we'll talk about deferred, because we do a lot of deferred work and we are still taking some deferred applicants, maybe a few more, honestly, not many more than that. But we still can certainly help you if you want. I would say 770 and a 3.2, you could be competitive for a deferred program at Wharton. The 3.2 is going to make it challenging. I would want to take a look at the resume and see what type of leadership you have. What do the internships look like? Do you have a full-time job after school? What is that job? But that's where, the high GMAT score might offset the lower GPA. And I think it's worth applying, but applying cautiously, let's say. Now, deferred programs, right? If you're in school and you're either in college or in graduate school or recently out of school, some deferred programs are actually open to taking you just after you've graduated, if it's, recent enough. Then you can apply through the deferred programs. And that's kind of done in round 3 anyway. But in that case, there's no downside, right? Because if you're deferred, you're obviously applying in round 3. You might have done it in round 2, but usually in round 3. And so this is a really good time to be applying, no downsides at all. And then it's just a matter of getting all your ducks in a row, right? Having it clear to the admissions directors that there's a reason why you want to do the MBA. You've thought about this and you have your, post-MBA plans, you have your post-undergrad plans, you have your long-term plans, and you're able to go into them in enough level of detail and specificity that they see that you know what you're doing. But it's not like you're definitely going to come later. If you are absolutely going to be applying at a later time, then the schools might pass over you because they prefer to just take you later versus through the deferred process. So here's a question. Do international students usually have enough time for visas if they apply in round 3? It's a really good question, right? So during the height of the challenges, let's say, in the last couple of years, there have been times when it actually was more difficult to get visas, and round 3 was a little bit discouraged. But otherwise, we have seen it work out. Yeah, and I've never had an applicant that hasn't been able to start school because of a visa challenge, right? I'll say that again. I've never had an applicant who has not been able to start school because of a visa challenge. Schools are used to this. It's harder, and schools recommend people do rounds 1 and 2. But look, the majority of people do rounds 1 and 2. And so if you are doing round 3 and you need the school's help to try to get the visa sorted, they're usually able to help out. And we do international applicants in round 3 regularly, and they've all been fine getting in. So it's a very good question to ask, but so far so good on that front. So here's a question from folks. What about round 3 and round 1? What's my strategy if I want to do both? I just had an applicant today that I talked to who wanted to do a 6-school package with us, do some round 3, some round 1. And what does that look like? So if you want to think about splitting, it's not a bad idea, right? Either way, you want to get started on the process. It's March. You have to start, whether it's on the test prep or working on your goal statement discussion or prepping recommenders. Even if you're doing round 1, you still want to get started soon. Let's say do most of the work April, May, June, maybe a little bit in March. Hopefully you're finishing up by early July. If you're doing round 3, then you're going to really rush, let's say, near the deadlines. So the strategy might be, hey, let me go for my best schools in round 3, see if it works out. If it works out, great. If not, I have my slightly more backup options in round 1 that I can add to the mix. That's one option. The other option could be, let's just go for a wide range of schools. I really want to get in and lock them in. And then if somehow I decide to change my mind later and not go, I can ask for a deferral. These are not guaranteed, and they work best if there's a real reason for the deferral. And it's not, I want to try to apply to a competitor school instead. Probably not what I'd recommend writing to admissions, but maybe there's another reason why this year doesn't quite work out. Could be something personal related or medical related, or another reason why you feel like you want to get deferred. And then while you get the deferral, you could always apply to some other schools in round 1 at the same time. I would say do that if you're planning on going to that school, but maybe just throw in a Hail Mary. Just let's say if you get into Stanford, nobody's going to blame you if you go to Stanford instead of whatever other school you got accepted to. So here's a question of recommenders, right? So how long should the recommendation letters be? So I would say for the recommendation letters, and this is not really a round 3 specific question, but still a great question. The recommendation letters should answer the questions exactly as the school asks. It's important to think about. So with AGAC, I'm on the board of AGAC, the Association of International Graduate Admissions Consultants. If you don't know about AGAC, shout out to AGAC. Check us out. We're having an applicant fair coming up. We do a lot of different things with admissions directors, analyze these fake profiles every year and debate who's getting in and rejected and why. So a little bit of a behind the scenes look to see how they make their decisions. We also try to talk through the rec process with admissions directors. The recommendations used to be different, quite different based on the school. And now a lot of schools, thankfully, have adopted the common letter, which AGAC started with admissions directors some years ago, along with GMAT. And so they're pretty structured questions. It might be 500 words for a question, and so the answer should be 500 words. If you want to be a little bit off, right, you want to be 10%, 20%, so plus or minus, that's probably okay for a recommendation letter. You don't want to be 20% long for your essay. That won't be good. But for a recommendation letter, that's okay. So usually you're talking about, let's say on average, 1,000 words of writing for the rec letter. Some schools, that's a little bit less. Some schools have extra questions, but that's kind of what you want to think about from a recommendation standpoint. And while we're on the topic of recommendation letters, for round 3, you really want to pick someone who is very timely, right? You don't have the chance of waiting and seeing if they might be late. They have to sort of get started right away and be submitting in the coming weeks. So timeliness is going to be important here. The other thing that's going to be important will be to ask somebody who kind of knows the process. They don't have to have written this before, but they have to know you. They have to know enough about the school and the process so they can get into that level of detail and clarity in the short period of time that they have. The title and prestige doesn't matter. So you can ask somebody who is 1 level above you or 7 levels above you. That doesn't matter at all. Just that they can write very, very specific and detailed letters about you. That's important. And that they can really compare you to others, right? We give whole presentations on rec letters, so I won't get into all of that, but they can compare you to others, right? And go into details about what you did, how it was different from someone else, and be honest, right? As you're thinking about recommender feedback, the feedback should be really, really specific. And it should be negative. There should be something bad that you did in this process. And you messed up here, and based on this, you didn't vary the tone of your argument well in this deposition, or you didn't vary the presentation style to the audience well, or the analytical skills weren't that strong and the model was a little bit off and you had to redo the model, right? Something negative that happened, and then you learn from it and you try to improve. So that's my sort of 2 cents on recommenders, but certainly there's a lot more that we can talk about recommenders as well. When it comes to round 3, and okay, here's a question: if the short-term goal is in tech, given how the tech industry is impacted this moment, does this add to the chance of me getting rejected? So that's a really good question, actually. And thank you for that one. No, absolutely not. Think about this. First of all, recessions come, recessions go. So yes, tech jobs are not super hot now, but once we get through the cycle, my prediction, and don't bank on my prediction. If I actually knew what's happening in the markets, I would be an investor and not doing admissions consulting. But my prediction is things are going to change right soon. And so if you're applying now, you'll start in the fall. And for those of you listening to this thinking, hey, round 3 is not for me, well, then you'll apply in round 1 and you'll start 2024. You'll finish in 2025, right? At least if not later, unless you're doing a 1-year MBA. By then, cycles are going to change. So hopefully we'll be out of the recession, more jobs will come. And even if you are applying during a time when it's not great for jobs, it's not your fault that there's a recession. So the school really won't be concerned with you writing about tech and your goals. The goals should be specific. They should be achievable. They should be ownable. They should be your goals. The idea is not to write something that you think admissions directors want to read. You want to write something that, I guess if you're working with a consultant, they tell you this is exactly what they want to read, then maybe go with that. But try not to make this assumption on your own, because there's not necessarily one sector that's better to write about for goals, right? I have people that will write about consulting. Let's say I had someone at a top consulting firm, MBB, that wrote about consulting post MBA, and they were at first concerned. They said, "What if I just say I want to do consulting and I want to come back and be a partner? Is that boring?" I said, well, it doesn't matter, right? That's what you want to do. And they're still at that consulting firm, actually. They just recorded a video for us yesterday. So, there's no downside in that, right? And similarly with other industries, if you say banking versus, nonprofit or something, you don't just want to write something because it sounds interesting, right? You want to write something that makes sense for you. Because what happens sort of behind the scenes, and I'm rambling a little bit here, but hopefully it's helpful, is the admissions director would read the application. They might have someone from career services read the application. They might have a second reader, might have a student. And so different people will weigh in with different pieces of advice. And if you have a student reading, which is actually going through the admissions process, or an alum, or maybe a career services professional, they'll know what's realistic and what's achievable. So if you just have this lofty, ambitious goal that's not likely to happen, you're better off saying, hey, look, I work in product now. I'm on the technical side. I want to come back and be a product manager at, leading, let's say, FANG company. And then long term, I might be a director of innovation. That's a fine path. So that's a little bit about goals. Any other questions around, timing, let's say, in the application? So here's a question for how long does a candidate remain as a reapplicant? That's a good question. So the next year, you're definitely a reapplicant. So if you apply in round 3 and you will apply again in round 1, that does count as being a reapplicant. If it's the prior year, that would also probably count in most cases. This definition of reapplicant is going to vary a little bit based on the school, right? So the schools are a little bit different in how they classify reapplicant. Is it 1 year later? Is it 2 years later? Is it any time in your future life? But to be honest, I wouldn't be hung up on this. So it's a great question, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is you're going to submit when it's the right time for you, and you're going to convey yourself in the strongest way. And whether you're a reapplicant or not, I don't really care, to be honest. Reapplicants are fine. Roughly 10% of students are reapplicants. So that means, let's say, start at the top at Harvard, over 90 kids a year got rejected at least one time, right? And we had this applicant, Nikhil, who applied to Harvard and Booth in 1 year, didn't get in. And then the next year, well, we got waitlisted at Harvard, but didn't get in. And then the next year, we applied to 6 schools, which is a more standard process. If you just do 2, who knows? Got to Harvard and graduated from HBS and did great. For him, just took him 2 tries, right? And we knew that he had a profile that could succeed, so we didn't add like a lot of safety schools, because we'd rather just try it again, and that's what happened, and it worked out. So really no downside applying as a reapplicant, especially from round 3, because they know that, hey, there aren't that many spots. They know that you don't know who they need, and there's no website where they post, we need, X male and X female, and from this, but they don't write that, right? So it's sort of a black box unless you apply anyway. See if you can snag a spot. If you can't snag a spot, then you try again in round 1, and really without any downside at all. And you don't have to improve your profile drastically, right? That's another question that we just got about. How much does my profile need to change from round 3 to round 1, right? I'm looking at applying round 3, but I'm a little bit concerned. What if it doesn't work out? Will I lose my chance? Will I have to totally change my goals and my job and my test score? How can I do that? It's already April. I have no time to do those things. Don't worry about that. You don't have to change any of those things. Now, of course, if your score is low, right? If the average score for the school is a 730 and you're an overrepresented applicant and you have a 710, 710 might not be enough. So perhaps raise that, but that would be my feedback regardless of when you apply. Could have applied never or 5 years ago. I would still give you that feedback. But your job doesn't need to change. Your extracurriculars don't need to change. At the end of the day, if you're a strong applicant and what you conveyed is strong, then it's totally fine to just stick with that same plan. Now, the essays themselves need to actually change, right? So you can't write the same essay, but the goals within the essay do not need to change. And that's something important to keep in mind. Okay. Any questions about topics that we haven't covered? Feel free to be sort of off base and, I don't know, anything except for politics, I guess. Happy to chat about, anything related to round 3 or applications in general. Often people ask about jobs, right? How many jobs do I need to have? What if I'm going to switch jobs? Is it still a good idea to apply now, or should I wait? So let's just say give an example. You are 4 years out of school and you had 2 jobs and you just started another job last month. You really want to go to business school and you're thinking of round 3 to try to snag a spot and get in. Is this a good idea? In this case, I would probably say no, because if you wait a year, you'll have 5 years. That's the most common anyway. So you're probably just going to increase your chances a little bit. And you just started work, and we have 3 jobs. So now all of a sudden we have 3 jobs in 4 years, and one of the jobs you've been at for a month, it's going to show a little bit too much movement. And it's not a story that I'd like to convey. So I would probably rather sign you up for round 1 in that case, just to have a little bit of consistency in the application as far as the work experience is concerned. So here's a question. Is the university where I did my undergrad a factor that is considered during the selection process? Does it matter where I went to school? I would say yes. All things being equal, someone who graduated from a higher ranked school is going to be more interesting to an admissions team. That said, it's not an end all be all if you didn't come from a target school, right? So, not everybody goes to the best schools in the world, and that's okay. You look at Harvard Business School, they usually take 260 to 270 different, colleges, meaning for a school where 900 and something kids in a class, you have, usually 260, 270 different schools represented, a lot of variation. So it's not just the top Ivy League schools, or, if you didn't go to IIT or, BITS Pilani or SRCC, don't worry about it, right? You can go to a non-target school and get in. But what does that mean, right? It means that the bar might be a little bit higher when it comes to GPA. If I'm looking at a Princeton economics graduate or a Ohio State University philosophy graduate, the Ohio State graduate can absolutely still get into school, but they'll need to do better in undergrad. A 3.75 is not the same across both of those schools, unfortunately. At the same time, the test scores are going to be a little bit more important as well. So if I went to a non-target school, then the admissions directors might not know what my true potential is by the time I matriculate. And so if I get a great test score, it's almost like it counts double. Let's say I went to a really low ranked school and I got a 3.95 GPA. Well, is that just because the school was easy, right? And the caliber of the candidates wasn't quite as strong? Or does that mean you're a genius and you could do that anywhere? Well, if you get a really great test score, then that means you can do it anywhere. And if you bomb the test, then probably it's just because the undergrad school was easy. That's why you did well. So here's a question. How would you answer, excuse me, if interviewers ask why you waited until round 3 to apply? Look, my policy in life is just to be honest, right? So I would just tell them why you waited. Why didn't you apply? There must be some reason. And whatever that reason is, it's a real reason. Now, are there better reasons than others? Yes. But you are you, and maybe you didn't get the test score in time. Maybe work was busy, personal challenge, family in the hospital, right? Whatever, you just started thinking about the MBA last week. It's not worth making up a reason. So I would just be honest and just tell them why you're applying in round 3. It is what it is. If you're wondering if you have an answer that's not a good one, feel free to shoot me an email. Happy to tell you if that's the wrong thing to say, but otherwise I would just try to be as honest as you can. So here's a question. My age is 40. I have 15 years of work experience. Does my age matter in the selection process? So the age does matter. And depending on the type of program that you apply to, it might help you or it might hurt you. So I just got off the phone with someone who, works at a top tech company, and they'll have 10 years of experience by the time they apply. If you're watching the video, hello. And we're thinking about executive MBA programs, right? 10 years leading large teams. It just feels like that's the right structure. So I think if you're 40 and you have 15 years of experience, my first thought is to think about executive, because you'll be surrounded by people that are also similarly experienced. They're more mature. They're managing other people. I think that's kind of the right way to go about it. I think that, at the same time, if you wanted to do a full-time MBA program, you certainly could do it, right? It's not that you're not qualified for a full-time, but at age 40 with 15 years, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. So that's where you want to think about different structures of programs, whether it's a 1-year program, whether it's a tech MBA program. We recently sent someone out from India to a top US tech MBA, 1-year tech MBA with 12 years of experience. And that made sense for them, right? So you want to think about the sort of structure. So here's a question. As compared to the undergraduate score, is GMAT more important? I wouldn't say that GMAT is more important. I would say they're equally weighted. But The thing about the GMAT is it's a test that everybody takes. And so depending on your school, if it's a school that, let's say, the admissions directors don't see often, a smaller school, a more regional school that they don't have the ability of going through their CRM systems and seeing the last 25 people that came from your school, they might just not know much about the program or how competitive it is. Then if you come in with a 750 GMAT, well, then that says something. At the same time, the balance is if it is a school that admissions directors might see other people from, then the undergrad GPA shows how you studied over 4 years. What were you like as a student? How committed were you, right? And that's in some ways a better predictor for what you'll do in business school than just one test that you might have hired the best tutors for. Maybe you hire a personal MBA coach for tutoring, and we get you an amazing score. We put you through our online software. Our tutors of 770, 780 and up. Everybody raises their scores. Maybe you do that and you get a great score, but then you're really not the best student. And you go to school, and all of a sudden the 3.0 behavior comes back again, right? So that's where the GPA is important too. Okay, so here's a question. Hi, I'm a mechanical engineer from India, having 37 plus months of experience. Is it legitimate to apply for MIM profile as a flagship MBA? Is apply for MIM profile as flagship MBA is really costly in Europe. Is it really realistic in round 3? Right. So if you're looking at specialized masters, MIM is master's management for those who aren't familiar. A specialized master's versus an MBA. Looking at a specialized master's is totally fine. And it seems like for 3 years of experience, you could absolutely qualify for a specialized master's. They tend to be a little bit younger in the class. And what's nice about this is you're going to learn a lot. If you take an MIM or maybe a master's in finance, you'll learn perhaps more about that particular field than you would in just an MBA. Probably more so in the finance example than in the management example. And so you might land a really nice job. The job might not be quite as senior as it would be if you come from an MBA program. But yeah, certainly no downside in doing the specialized master's. And I think it might make sense for you. For those of you that have any interest in asking questions that are private, right, that you don't want to ask here, feel free to shoot us an email, scott@personalmbacoach.com. Depending on how long or detailed the question is, I will try to answer it. And if you're looking for any support in the applications, visit our website. We have a lot of free downloadables, materials, and guides, and happy to help out. And also reach out and we can schedule a consultation if you're looking at hiring someone for help. So here's a question. Are round 3 applicants compared to those waitlisted in rounds 1 or 2? Or they evaluate as a whole new group? That's a really good question, actually. So they are definitely compared against waitlisted folks, right? Because waitlisted, or in some cases, schools say they defer you to another round. That means that they're not sure if they like you yet, and they want to compare you to other people that come in later. So yes, in round 3, you would be compared against other people that are waitlisted in previous rounds. And you could even be waitlisted in round 3, right? It could just be the case that they don't know if they have a spot for you. I mean, when you're waitlisted for a few different reasons. One, they like you, but they don't think something is good enough yet. Maybe years of work experience, maybe test score. Waitlist is a signal to say, hey, Scott, you're pretty good, but raise your GMAT score. I'm going to waitlist you. And that's a signal to you. Depending on the school, they might actually come right out and tell you, right? So they might call me and say, Scott, you need to get this score. Can you get it by this date? I mean, some schools are very blunt and they say that. Others have more hands-off approach where it's just the signal of waitlist is all that they're communicating. They're not actually communicating anything further to you, and they leave it for you to deduce what some of the reasons are for the waitlist. Or it could just mean that they're full. They don't have enough people, or rather they already have too many people that are like you. And so they're just waiting to see if there are others. So if nobody else comes from this industry in round 3, then maybe the waitlist person, can get in. Whereas if you come in round 3 and you have this killer application, because you got the best essays, you got the best strategy, the best support, you might beat out that waitlisted person in round 2. Okay, so any suggestions for international students applying in round 3? I don't think that my international strategy versus my domestic strategy is going to be that different in round 3 versus what international versus domestic usually would, except to say that you want to show the school that you really thought about the move and the life considerations and changes ahead of time. Because every year I hear about from some admissions director friends where, so-and-so gets in and they're not able to, kind of get there in time. And for whatever reason, they just don't make it, right? And so one of the things on admissions director's mind is that will this applicant actually come? And so if you are international, you want to show them, hey, I've made this decision. Like, this is my school. I know I want to go. And if accepted, I will enroll. You might even write that. If there's a top school, don't be afraid to say, hey, Columbia is my number one choice. And if accepted, I will matriculate. Who knows if that's true? Nobody knows if you're telling the truth or not. But if it is, then feel free to write that. Don't write that if that's not true. But obviously, if it is, that's certainly something that you can say, and it might increase the chances of you getting in. So here's a question. I'm 36 years old, have 9 years, 6 months of work experience in the software industry, 760 GMAT, have 1 year of international work experience, currently working as a manager. Should I apply round 3 in UK and US? So I think given that you're older and more experienced, I might recommend a round 3 move to save another year of work experience, right? Otherwise, you're just 1 year older. That said, I would want to look at you in a bit more detail offline to give further advice on what schools and which ones, US versus Europe. The European schools will be a little bit more flexible when it comes to age and work experience. The distribution, the curve. Let's say US, here's the top of the curve. Think about this, and you have or rather earlier folks are out here, and later folks are down here. The camera has it backwards for me. The curve is more flat in Europe. So you have more people that are a bit older than you have in the US. So I would say probably focus a little bit more on the European schools or the 1 year MBA programs. Any other questions from folks we haven't gotten to yet? I know there was this whole thread about, round 3 based on the level of work experience and, how experienced you are. So we can talk about that. If you're not old, right? Not that I'm calling anybody old. If you're not more experienced and you're thinking, I wonder if round 3 is right for me. We have some more experienced folks here. It still definitely could be right for you, right? Let's say if you have 3 years of experience or 4 years, you might be sitting there thinking, I wonder if I should do round 1 so that I can go from 4 to 5 years of experience. Well, guess what? The difference is not that big between 4 and 5 years. So if this is the right time for you and you think applying is going to make sense for you personally and professionally, don't be afraid to apply now. Conversely, let's say if you only have a year of experience, maybe getting a little bit more experience could help. And the extra competitive nature of round 1 in the recession might not really make a difference, considering round 3 has fewer spots and you're also a little bit earlier on in your career. When it comes to round 3 and the goals, right? And this is not something that honestly I've ever talked about before or anybody's ever asked me before, but sometimes I just say what's on my mind and developing my thoughts as I speak. But I would think that the round 3 goals clarity is going to be a little bit more important than for those applying in earlier rounds. Here's my thinking behind this, right? If you're applying now, you submit the application in April, you're interviewing in May, March to April to May, something like that. You're going to start school maybe in August. You have to be super, super clear about your plans. If you don't really know what you want to do, it's even more of an issue for you because you don't have much time. Let's say if you apply in round 1, or even more of an extreme, Columbia, you submit it in June. You have the whole year to talk with students, network, talk with them, figure out, my post-MBA plans weren't really right. And I'm now being sort of corrected. But in round 3, you don't really have that chance. So there's probably a little bit more of a bar, a little bit higher bar as far as the quality and specificity with respect to your goals, just because as soon as you get in, you're basically going to start coming to campus and going to start recruiting pretty soon. So round 3, let's see, any other questions here? I'm just checking the field. So one next thing that I'll talk about is, number of schools by region and by full-time versus part-time versus executive MBA. So if your average applicant is applying to 6 or 7 schools, and some of the schools are part-time programs and some of them are full-time and some of them are executive, maybe that number ends up being a bit higher. But let's say you're only looking for 1 year programs and you're only looking at Europe. You might not find 7 or 8 1 year programs in Europe that you want to apply to, and that's okay. Especially if you're doing round 3 and you think that you could just reapply in round 1. Don't add schools just for the sake of adding. But if you're doing a bunch of different options, you don't want to have only 2 programs that you can apply to that are full-time 2-year, you want to have enough options because sometimes you need the law of numbers to kind of help out in this process. So for those of you looking at some other sort of questions in general around, let's say, the resume in round 3, right, and what you want to do there. So for the resume, at the end of the day, the professional resume is different from the MBA resume because you want to sell yourself as being smart and successful and accomplished, and you're not selling yourself for being an expert in any particular skill, any particular industry, because the person reading the resume, they may or may not be familiar with your background. And so you just want to be an overall sort of leader and be successful. So you want to make sure that you can compare yourself to others and that the details that you cover are super specific, but not too specific that you're using technical language. Now, it's not really a round 3 versus round 1 resume situation, but more so, again, the better the resume is now, the more confident the admissions director will be that you'll have a great resume by the time you submit for jobs, because you don't have as much time to prep, to talk with alums, to talk with other students, and that sort of thing. So, a little bit more about like kind of what we can do here. Let's say you're not sure if you're doing round 3 or round 1. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to give you some offline thoughts. And if you want to consider getting any help in the process, we can help you from brainstorming to profile development, early planning, really selecting the schools, making sure that they're the right fit for you. Again, for those of you who came in late, I'm Scott Edinburgh, founder of Personal MBA Coach. I went to MIT for undergrad, Wharton for my MBA. Been running Personal MBA Coach for the last 16 years. We got $6.5 million in scholarships in the last round for applicants, and we can help you to get it. So feel free to reach out if you have any other thoughts or questions. But thank you, GMAT Club, for hosting this. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and wishing you all best of luck throughout your round 3 journey or in any future applications.